every story has two sides, and the same happens with board games that can look at the same theme from different directions. In Ticket to Ride, you're building railroads, and then in certain war games, you're blowing up bridges and railroads. In Pandemic, you're defeating viruses, and in Viral, then you have the same story finally told from the point of view of the viruses, this nice, cute, innocent, freaky monsters that are trying simply to live, to expand, to do their thing, and in so doing, they will multiply across the human body and cause all sorts of problems. Yes, this is a game where the players are playing the role of strands of viruses that are trying to multiply across the host whose body is represented on the board, and you're trying again to spread across, to have a presence in the various organs in the body. But you are living, alas, the paradox of the virus. If you're very successful, you're having a lot of different versions of yourself because you just multiply across the body. But of course, the more successful you are, the more you are damaging your host, and that causes all sorts of problems. Including the fact that the organs that you're trying to control, they're gonna fail. At the same time, the more effective you are, the more the scientists take notice of you, those pesky scientists from Pandemic, and they're trying to develop cures against you. Very original theme, very unusual idea. I liked it from the moment I heard that there was a game about this. But of course, theme is not enough. We also wanna know that the components are good, so that they convey gameplay, and also wanna know the gameplay is interesting. So without further ado, let's take a closer look at the components and at the rules of Viral. This is the board of the game. It looks different, that's for sure. It looks different from the boards of most of the games that I own, but it also looks pretty cool. It looks neat, and also it is pretty functional. It represents the battlefield that our viruses will try to control and devastate. The battlefield, the human body, where the game takes place, is divided in organs and areas. The brain is both an organ and an area, and then the other organs are organized in areas. These two parts of the heart represent a single area, although they count as two organs for game purposes. Then we have two lungs, the liver and pancreas, the digestive apparatus with stomach, and the two intestines. Again, you have to think of these as separate play areas, but then there's the game effects that will target the zone that the organs form, and then we have two kidneys. Also, you see there are connections from one organ to the other. Viruses will travel around, but when they do so, they have to follow the direction of these arrows. Usually you can move freely between organs in the same zone, but then things become more restricted once you jump into the bloodstream. And then, for example, to get to the brain, you can only enter from there, and you can exit from there. The lungs also a little bit stuck. If you jump from the heart, then you have a lot of places where you can go, as you can see from the direction of the arrows. There's also this connection here, and this is pretty much the area where you can move more freely. You can move from intestine to intestine and the stomach, and then since there are connections in both directions here, you can jump to the liver and the pancreas and back there. But again, the bloodstream doesn't take prisoners, so I guess it does, and it brings them all to the heart. And when you get out of there, again, pretty much there's nothing else to do but to go to that side of the heart to get in the lungs. Also, you have restrictions and so on and so forth. Each zone in the game has one of these tokens, which is placed there randomly at the beginning of the game. They're double-sided. You place them with the white side face up. And there are more than you will use in any single game, so there will be variety, not just because of the placement, but because you will not have the same pool of tokens every time. These tokens represent the number of victory points that the player that controls the organ scores, but also the research that has been done against you, because if you control a certain area, then the scientists take notice, darn scientists, these meddling scientists, and well, things will be bad for you. When you score an area because you have control, you get those points, which you record on the scoring track. But then also you increase your position on this display by moving this marker up by that number of spaces. And when it gets all the way to the top, it's bad because the scientists have found a cure against you. And you start here from the bottom. So scoring points for controlling areas is good, but you're also attracting attention. Since we're talking about the scoring track, it is not just used to keep track of how many points the players have, but also to trigger other events. As you see from those icons, when a player goes into an area marked with that symbol or past that area, the player gets to draw an extra card. I'll show you those cards later. That means in a game you can have 4 extra cards from the ones that you started with, so there's a little bit of a deck building element there. And when any player moves into or past that space, then all of the scoring tokens are flipped to the other side, which is usually more valuable. It gives you more points, or it reduces the research value that the scientists are able to produce against you. The actions that you can perform in the game mainly revolve around the use of this player board here. Each player has one, and they also act as player aids, reminding you of the meaning of the icons in the game. And also you use cards. You have 2 sets of cards, one indicating all zones in the body, 1 zone per card, and then you have a starting set of action cards with icons representing what the card can do for you. Some cards will be also worth victory points, but not the initial ones, the ones that you acquired during the game. And so yes, during the game you will add more cards to your pool of initial cards. Now, each turn there will be 2 action phases. At the beginning of each phase, the players secretly select a card representing an organ and a card representing actions, and they place them face down secretly on this side of their player board where it says 1. So everybody plans their actions for this action phase, then you reveal them, and then players alternate resolving those actions in that zone. Usually, there are some actions that are not based on a single zone, but these ones that have a light blue square in the background do. You have to perform it in the zone that you committed to. Other ones give you a lot more freedom. Of course, when it's movement, you can move outside of that area, and later you may acquire more powerful cards that are not linked to specific areas. But most of the things that you do will be linked to the area that you committed to. So players reveal their cards, resolve the actions, then you repeat the procedure. Again, everybody commits an organ, a zone, and an action. Everybody reveals. Everybody resolves. Then you take these cards and you put them here. You see where there's that symbol there. And they're not available for next turn. So then we resolve a couple of other phases, and we'll talk about those. And then the next turn, that is again the idea. I choose an organ, zone, and an action, resolve. Choose a zone and an action, resolve. And at this point, I take these cards back and I put them back into my pool of available cards. These go to the discard pile, and these are now not available for the next turn. So you cannot pretty much interact with the same zone directly 2 turns in a row. I cannot keep placing new viruses here. I have to figure out other ways. For example, maybe one turn I'm adding viruses here directly, and then another turn I'm playing a zone which is adjacent to it, and I'm playing movement, and then I'm moving from the zone to this one. Just an example of, you could, for example, reinforce a certain area without using the same card twice in a row, because you can't. The rules don't let you. Now, as for the actions themselves, the things that you can do, again, as you can see, different cards will have different combinations of icons, and this is an excellent player aid. In fact, you place a virus from your player board in any organ, again, with the restriction of the zone that you have selected. Viruses are just regular or shielded. Usually you place them regular, and then there is an action that lets you flip your viruses to the shield side face up, which makes them more resilient against attacks. Crisis. Well, actually, before we get to this type of crisis, so players will place viruses on the board. When an organ has 3 or more viruses, no matter who plays them, you place a crisis token there, and it will be resolved later during the game. The crisis effect lets you place a crisis marker in an organ that otherwise would not have it, would not trigger a crisis. And crises allow you to score points, but may also remove your viruses. Attack, you remove a virus that belongs to another player from an organ. Of course, you need to have at least 1 virus in that organ. These viruses don't have long-distance drones just yet. Magnets, in an organ where you have at least 1 virus, you may pull a virus from an adjacent location, or you may push a virus to an adjacent location. This can be very powerful because many effects have to do with area control and majority, and you can manipulate that easily using the magnet. Absorb, you choose one of your viruses in an organ and you place all of the viruses in that organ under your virus. For example, if I play absorb on that one, now these go there, but that also counts for viruses of the opponents. And now all the ones that are stuck there, pretty much you temporarily eliminate them, and all the ones that have been absorbed do not exist in the game for game purposes. Again, very powerful way of virtually removing the enemies temporarily. Because they will be released in phase 6, which is at the end of a turn. Shield, you flip one of your viruses shield side up, and then you move a virus. You make 1 virus movement, which is, again, you move from an area, from an organ to another, following the blood flow. So this is the basic idea, but now let's see the turn structure more in detail, because there are a couple of interesting things going on there. Each turn has 6 phases, which is kind of a lot, but only 1 phase really takes a little bit, and it is the main phase where you perform your actions. Also, this area of the board here tells you what happens in each phase, does a very good job of reminding you of what you need to do in each phase, so not a problem. At the beginning of the first phase of a turn, you pass the first player's marker to the next player, and then you perform the actions as I showed you earlier. First, an action card in a location, resolve that, do the same again, draw the discard pile, and form a new discard pile with the cards that you used this turn. And that is what we saw earlier. Then move to the next phase, which has control. We check to see who has control of each zone of the body, and that is when we score those points there, but also where we attract the attention of the scientists, and therefore we move our tokens up. Now, differently from other games that have area majority, it is not enough in this game to have, not enough or not even necessary, to have the absolute majority in a certain zone. You score each zone, but in order to have area majority, control of that zone, you need to have a virus in each organ in that zone. That is, an opponent may have 3 tokens here, and I have 2 like this, so the total in the zone, the highest total is 3, but the player doesn't get majority. You get majority if you have at least a virus in each organ in a zone. Now, if multiple players all meet that requirement, then you look at the sheer total. That is, if that player had 2 here and 1 here, then the player also has 1 in each organ, has absolute majority, 3 versus 2, and that player gets to score those points. 4 points, really neat, and also gets, however, the penalty of having research being done against him or her, or it, because we're talking about viruses. And in case there is still a tie there, then you use the tiebreaker. There's an area of the board that you use to keep track of the tiebreaker, and that is updated at the end of a round. So here we get points and we update this. If you get your token up here, then a vaccine has been found against you, but it doesn't come into effect just yet. After that, we resolve an event, a random event. There is a deck of event cards larger than this. You shuffle them and you get 6 of them randomly each game, so you will not have the same events each game. And after you form the deck of 6, you flip it face up so the player can see in advance the event that's going to hit this turn or next turn. At the beginning of the game is this turn. After you resolve the event, simply doing what the text says, you discard that card. And so the players can see what the random event for the next turn is going to be. So you can plan ahead. It just becomes an opportunity to exploit or a danger that you're trying to avoid. Also, since the game lasts 6 turns and you have 6 event cards, these event cards also act as the timer. When the events are out, when you're out of events, the game is over. Oh, look at this one. Number 1, of course, you can't have number 1 without number 2. And remove all viruses in the large intestine. I don't think I need to elaborate on why that is so. Next, we resolve crises. Remember, when you have 3 viruses in an organ during the main phase of the turn, that triggers a crisis, so you place a crisis marker there. Incidentally, by the time you resolve this, it may be that there aren't 3 viruses there anymore because their game effects have destroyed them, moved them, absorbed them. It may be that they're not the same viruses that triggered the crisis. It doesn't matter. At this point, we resolve that crisis. And the player that has the majority in that organ that is suffering a crisis gets to score 2 points. All of the players that have a present there get to score 1 point. Then this is when we finally resolve the effect of vaccines that have been found. Players that have been attacked by researchers lose all of their unshielded viruses, so they're simply removed from the board, and if they have shielded viruses, those are flipped to their unshielded side. Incidentally, you have that penalty, exactly the same penalty, also after you score for a crisis. When you score for a crisis, you remove the crisis marker, remove all viruses in that organ that are unshielded, and reduce all the shielded ones to their unshielded side. So you may have a local penalty here, and then if a vaccine, a cure was found for you, boom, you lose all of your unshielded ones. It can be pretty devastating if you lose all of your presence on the board. That way it can be really hard to come back. Finally, the tiebreaker. Each player will have a token here, and the tiebreaker is being on top is better, and being higher on this track means that you break a tie. At this point, during the 6th phase of a turn, we update the tiebreaker. The last player, in terms of victory points, goes on top, second to last goes second, and so on and so forth. This is what happens during the game, that this being higher gives you the tiebreaker during the game. If at the end of the game there is a tie, then it works the other way around. The winner is the player that is at the bottom of the tiebreaker. So you play for 6 turns, you score points from all the possible sources of victory points in the game. Most of them will have been collected during the game, and at that point, the player with the highest total is the winner of the game. I like this game a lot. It's fun. The art is cute. The board is cute and functional. But gameplay really surprised me. It is much deeper, much more complex and nuanced than I would have ever expected from the cute art and the overall simple rules. Yes, those phases can be a little daunting, and I have to say the rulebook doesn't do all that excellent of a job, in my opinion, to explain the game. There are some things that are not what I would expect them to be. Some important information is in small boxes that look like they're just giving you an example or adding some small detail, but that's like a key rule. There's a section at the beginning that is meant to give you the original concepts, but then some of those concepts are not repeated later in the book, or there isn't a reference, so you're reading about a certain section and you can't find something important that happens in that section because it was originally in those main concepts. Go there to the beginning of the book when there's something you can't find. Chances are it's there, unless it is in some other counterintuitive place. You'll get it, but it just took me a little longer and than I expected, and we wanted to double check information. We just spent more time with the rulebook than we expected. But then, when gameplay was finally feeling natural, and we were able to move through the game at a brisk pace and really getting the point. Gameplay turned out to be much more complex, nuanced, and interesting than I would have ever imagined. In a certain sense, it happened something like it happened with photosynthesis that also has simple rules, and it turned out to be deeper than it looked like. Viral, I thought it was going to be cute. I plan my moves, I execute them, see what other people have done, have a little bit of humor based on certain situations, and that be it. But then it turned out, all of a sudden the room got very, very quiet, which is what happens when everybody is really into the game and planning the moves and taking everything into account. Because like it often happens with games that have secret planning, secret deployment, you have to take into account a lot of other things that the opponents can do. And the unusual nature of the board demands pretty much that everybody starts in the same place. It's not like, well, I play so many games of this type that I pretty much know what to do here. Yes, you may have played games with secret deployment, secret selection of actions, but the unusual way the areas are connected and the way movement happens, the way you get stuck in a certain area and it's not easy to maneuver around it. So attacking a certain area is a big commitment. The way control is established by having a presence in all places, that also means it's not all that easy to defend your control. You may have control early on, but then somebody absorbs you. Just by eliminating a single virus of your pool of viruses, players may be able to eliminate your control. Just that air control works in very different ways from many other games. Other games, I may have a large majority and then you attack me by one, then you simply have reduced my majority but not removed it. Here, majority maybe not that hard to achieve, but it may be hard to keep once you have it. So actually going early on in the turn may be a problem because of that. Because you have some nice setup, and then players can just bash you and do all sort of things to you. So the way Area Majority works is different from other games. Again, it feels refreshing. It simply presents you, my seasoned fellow gamer, with challenges and decisions to make that maybe you haven't seen before. So there is that element there. And then, of course, the other element that the better you are, the more in danger you are. There are games that have done that. I seem to remember Ratus did something like that, where you also controlled, like there was a viral element and, there would be breakouts, etc., etc. You want to have presence, but if you had too much, then you have breakouts. But again, this is something that I really like in general, and it's a nice challenge here. That I want a certain presence, I want to trigger crisis, and I want to benefit from those crises, but I don't want to be damaged too much by the fact that I will lose the viruses that are there. Of course, ideally, then I trigger crises and I get control of areas, and so I increase the research against me when I am well shielded, so that then when the crisis occurs, when the vaccine arrives, my viruses are reduced, not destroyed. But then, of course, that means that I'm spending a lot of actions doing that, strengthening myself before I start scoring, and somebody else scores a lot. So you have to find this really, really delicate balance between defending yourself against the negative consequences of scoring and scoring. Because if you defend too much, you're not scoring. If you score a lot early on, you get devastated, you get kicked out of the board, then it gets very easy for other players to prevent you from pretty much coming back. Coming back is not as easy per se, and then when other players have an advantage, it's hard then for you to catch up. I would say probably this is the only, I wouldn't even say a negative thing, but something that may reduce your enjoyment of the game maybe the first or second time that you play, when you're not aware of the fact that the game can be a little unforgiving. If you make a couple of mistakes, that can have a ripple effect and may make it hard for you to come back. But again, with more players working together against the leader, there are ways of balancing that. The unforgiving quality of the design, again, is not something that has to be a negative, but keep that in mind, because it may turn into a bad thing for you, and it may lose you the game. As you may imagine, I'm speaking from personal experience. There was a game in which, in fact, I scored a ton. I was ahead by 20 points, And by the end of the game, I scored almost nothing more, and everybody was almost looping me on the track because then I scored a lot, I got kicked out of the board, and I was never able to come back. So you have a lot of interesting choices to make, and again, they feel so different, so new, or just the way they're combined together. All of these different things to take into account, the way you're cycling through your organ cards, so you cannot hit the same area twice in a row easily. That is, it can be done. You can overcome that by using effects that are not based on the zone card that you're playing, that allow you to move from the zone card that you're playing to another area. So everything is possible, but everything requires thinking, and the thinking that goes into this is reminiscent of other games, but it's always like slightly different. It's always slightly different from what you've learned in other games, so in any case, it's combined in different ways. Yes, I know games where I set up in a certain area and then I move, but here somehow the connections is different. Yes, I know area majority, but here the way it's done is not exactly how I knew it. There's a slight sense of novelty to the way things are done in this game, which is really refreshing. But again, it's not just originality for the sake of it. It means that the intellectual challenges that the game presents are different from the ones that you've seen in other games. And therefore, again, everybody starts from the same position. We have to think in terms of this game. There isn't much recycling that we can do from mechanics that we've seen in other game. And this way, again, in a game that is seems pretty obvious, pretty simple once you figure it out, that we were really into the design. We were like in flow, trying to constantly processing the information that was coming from the board, trying to take into account what everybody else was going to do. Of course, you have an advantage if you also keep track of what the other players are doing, that is the areas that they play. Ideally, you could even try to keep track of the cards and the actions they played. In a certain sense, again, if you don't obsess too much, you can do that, and it is an interesting challenge, and you can do that without analysis paralysis or without getting your brain to overload and explode. If I get a sense, yes, he used some deploy cards, so he's not gonna be able to bring new viruses to the board for a while. He attacked me a lot, so at least now I won't be able to attack me much. That sort of thing. If you try to get a general sense of where players are playing their actions and what actions they play, and you add that to your strategy, take that into account, you have an advantage. And when you think about this, that's quite a lot of things to take into account. The cards that you have played, because it's useless for me to plan a long-term action in an area that I won't be able to influence on many turns in a row. So the cards that I have, the cards that I have played, the cards that I want to acquire from the actions, the placement on the board where my viruses are, the crises that I may trigger, the actions that will give me points but will also give me penalties. What other players are doing, what they might be doing, what resources they have committed. When you take all of this into account, again, the game is deeper and heavier than I would have ever imagined, but not to the point that it became a brain burner, not to the point that it became overcomplicated or it felt like bloated or fiddly. The mechanics are simple, they are intuitive, very thematic, and again, the theme helps you remember what the mechanics do. They feel thematically right, at least from my understanding of medicine. A professional out there may probably see things here that do not quite make sense, but for the pop medicine that I understand, and from watching TV shows like ER, it seems to me very accurate. Yeah, very reliable. So it makes thematically sense, although I don't know how exactly accurate it is. It makes thematically sense. It makes sense in terms of gameplay. It presents me challenges that I haven't quite seen in this format, and definitely is a game that really drew us in. We all enjoyed it. We enjoyed it very much. We found it to be challenging, but not over challenging, with a nice puzzle element, but it didn't feel cerebral, thematic and humorous, while at the same time, again, still having a very strong, very strong, solid gameplay that did not feel fiddly at all. It was not a game that was thematic at the expense of simplicity and economy, like say you have in American trash games. So Viral very strong, very enthusiastic endorsement. I expected a game that would be cute and just light fun, and I would make jokes about viruses in number 1 and number 2. It turned out to be a game that had a lot of thinking into it, very, very deep, very satisfying gameplay, and therefore a game that I highly recommend to any serious gamer out there.